You'll hear a lot of terminology where folks will talk about in seminars and on videos about different types of grunts that they'll refer to as a tending grunt. In my opinion, from what I've seen, there's really not much difference between what I would call a tending grunt and a breeding grunt. And you don't hear a whole lot about a breeding grunt, but a tending grunt is typically a grunt that a younger buck will make as he's trailing a doe. A breeding grunt is a long, drawn out, very deep grunt, and it's usually made by more mature deer. In my personal opinion, I think they're both one and the same. You're just looking at two different levels of age maturity, and that's why you hear a little bit of a difference in sound. But generally, a real deep, a 5-6-year-old buck is going to make that grunt, and it's going to sound out. It's going to be long and drawn out, and it can last up to 7-8 seconds. And it's going to sound a lot like this. You're breathing a lot slower into the grunt. And the reason you're doing that is it's gonna start to actually make some clicking sounds within the grunt itself. The tending grunt, or what folks are calling the tending grunt, I think is more of a younger deer doing the exact same type of grunt. It just sounds a little bit lighter. So you'll just slide it up a little bit if you're dealing with a deer that may be 2.5 and 3.5. You're still gonna make it kind of drawn out, but maybe not as long either. It's gonna last 3 to 4 seconds, and it'll sound like this. You can tell the difference. Again, a long breeding grunt from a mature deer. And a younger deer that's probably 2.5 and 3.5. Very, very subtle differences, but the tone is what really clarifies the difference in age structure. The difference in when I would use one call over the other call when it comes to what folks call a tending grunt and what I call a breeding grunt is whenever I'm dealing with deer that I know are of age structure 5.5, 6.5 years old. It seems like the younger deer that are 2.5 and 3.5 don't tend to come to those grunt calls as much. Maybe it's because they haven't yet learned what that vocalization means, especially if you're hunting in some portions of the Midwest or out east where you don't have deer of that age class structure, or deer that have the real deep tones to their grunts. So if you are hunting in an area where you have deer that are mainly 2.5, 3.5, maybe even 1.5, you're going to want to tend to use that what they call a tending grunt, or what we've just described as a tending grunt. And if you're hunting here in the Midwest, in Iowa, Kansas, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and you're hunting deer that you know are around that are 5.5, 6.5 years old, that's when you're really going to want to focus on using that real deep breeding grunt. That deep breeding grunt I'll use at two different times. One, I'll do it in essentially what folks will refer to as a blind calling sequence. I may do a long drawn out doe call and then do a long drawn out breeding call. Just when we're sitting around, we don't have much action going on because you never know when there's a deer in the next draw. The other instance where I'll use a real deep call is whenever I watch a buck following a doe. I have pulled 5.5-year-old bucks off of does using that long drawn out call, but for the most part you've got to convince them that you've got a hot doe and estrus with you. So you're going to want to make a combination of that estrus doe bleat and those long deep drawn out grunts in order to get them to actually respond to you and come and leave her and come directly to your tree. It's rare, but you can pull it off. One thing you're going to want to keep in mind too whenever you're making these different types of calls is, and just to clarify, the age structure of the deer here in the Midwest, obviously, when our deer get to 5.5, 6.5 years old, you're looking at deer that are 280 plus pounds, field dressed. When you get on the East Coast or you get down to Texas or you get in other areas of the country where deer aren't as big, those sounds obviously aren't going to be as deep either. So when you hear me say and relate a lot of this calling techniques to upper age class deer, I am referring to the age class of deer, but also to the size of the deer. Remember, small deer make a little bit higher pitched frequency noises, where a great big buck that's going to weigh 280, 290 or above that, especially when you get up in areas of Saskatchewan, those are going to be even deeper yet.
The extinguisher reproduces the full range of white-tailed deer vocalizations. You'll recreate the fawn, doe, or buck in an instant. The extinguisher's precision monoslide guarantees you a perfect note every time without any guesswork. Bleats, balls, groans, growls, and roars, grunts, pops, and more. Quantities are limited for this season, so get yours now.